The rope snapped with a sound like a rifle shot, and Emmett Prescott dropped into darkness. He heard himself shout, felt the shaft walls scrape his shoulders raw as he fell, and then his boot caught a jutting stone and he slammed sideways into the well's rough throat, wedged 20 feet down with rubble sliding past his ears and the black water waiting below him like a mouth. Dust rained down. Somewhere above, men were shouting his name, but their voices sounded thin and far away, swallowed by stone. He clawed for a handhold, found none. The ledge under his boot crumbled another inch, and he felt his stomach drop with it. Then a shadow filled the mouth of the well above him, blotting out the gray mountain sky, and a voice like gravel dragged over iron called down into the dark. "Human, give me your arm before you feed the water spirits your bones." He didn't have time to be afraid of the voice, only grateful for it. A hand closed around his wrist, a hand easily twice the size of his own, green-skinned and strong as a forge clamp, and hauled him upward through 20 feet of collapsing stone as though he weighed no more than a sack of barley. He scraped and bounced against the shaft walls, cried out once when his knee cracked against rock, and then he was airborne, hauled bodily up and over the lip of the well to land hard on the packed earth of the market square, coughing dust, blinking against sudden daylight. A crowd had gathered. Monks in gray wool robes, traders who had abandoned their stalls. And standing over him, breathing hard, one boot still braced on the stone lip of the well where she had planted herself to keep from being pulled in after him, was the biggest, most striking woman Emmett Prescott had ever seen in his 31 years of life. She was an orc, tall enough to look most men in the eye from a full head above, her skin a deep mossy green touched with lines of old scars along one forearm, her black hair braided back tight from a strong, high-boned face. She wore fitted travel leathers, dark and well-oiled, laced snug up a torso built for both strength and speed, the leather cinched at her waist to show the lean, powerful line of her, a curved knife and a heavy hand axe both belted at her hip. Her eyes, when they found his, were a startling amber gold, sharp with the aftershock of having just risked her own footing to save a stranger's life. "You are a fool," she said, still catching her breath, "to dig a well without checking the rope first." The rope was checked, Emmett managed, still flat on his back in the dust, chest heaving. "Checked this morning, it should not have gone." "Should not," she repeated, and something in her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "And yet here you are, coughing mud, alive only because an orc happened to be standing close enough to catch you." He pushed himself up onto his elbows, taking her in properly now, the leather straps crossing her chest, the strength coiled in her shoulders, the confidence with which she stood over him as though the crowd gathering to stare at them both meant nothing to her at all. Behind her, a knot of monks and market folk had gone quiet and wary, the way people always went quiet and wary around orcs in a place like this, and Emmett felt a flush of something hot and unreasonable rise in his chest at the sight of their narrowed eyes. "Thank you," he said, plainly, looking only at her. "I would be dead at the bottom of that shaft if you hadn't come." "You would," she agreed, without false modesty. She held out her hand, the same hand that had hauled him from the dark, to pull him to his feet, and when his palm met hers he felt the calluses there, the strength banked under her skin like a coal fire under ash, and something in him went very still and very aware all at once. "I am Ragesh Ironblood," she said, "of the Ironblood clan, come down from the high camps to treat with your monks about the water." "Emmett Prescott," he answered, still holding her hand a moment longer than he needed to. "I dig the wells this valley drinks from, or I did, until this one decided to eat me." That finally won a real smile from her, quick, sharp-toothed, and gone as fast as it came, but he had seen it, and he found he wanted very badly to see it again. The monastery-market of Windgate sat at the head of the pass like a stone knuckle jammed into the throat of the mountains, the only crossing for 100 miles where wagons, mule trains, and orc caravans alike could pass from the eastern valleys into the high wild country beyond. The Grey brothers had built their monastery there 3 generations back, half chapel and half customs house, Because the pass demanded a toll of travelers in more ways than coin the air thinned, the nights turned murderous with cold, and without the deep well at the market's heart, no one, human or orc, could cross at all. That well was the reason Windgate existed. It was also, Emmett had come slowly to understand over the 2 years he'd spent contracted to its upkeep, cursed. He was given a cot in the monk's guest hall that night, his ribs wrapped, his knee packed in cold cloths, and Brother Halden, the monastery-stooped, sun-spotted elder, brought him watered wine and grim news in equal measure. The rope did not simply fray, Master Prescott, Halden said, settling onto the stool beside Emmett's cot with the particular weariness of a man delivering unwelcome truths. It was sound rope, new laid. I inspected it myself not 3 days past. Then what took me down? The same thing that has been fouling that well for a season now. The same thing that turned the water brackish last autumn and red as old blood the autumn before that. Halden's mouth thinned. The curse of Windgate is not a fireside tale, Master Prescott, whatever the caravan drivers tell their children to frighten them at night. It is old, and it is real, and it has teeth. Emmett had heard the stories in pieces over his years working the pass, something about a broken oath, a murdered envoy, blood owed and never paid. But he had always taken them the way he took most stories about orcs, which was to say with the polite disbelief of a man who had never had much reason to think about orcs at all, one way or the other, until a rope broke under him and a green hand hauled him back into the light. "Tell me," he said. Windgate had not always belonged only to the monks, Halden explained. 2 generations past, the market had been little more than a walled trading post run by a hard-handed lord named Aldrich Voss the Elder, and the deep well beneath it had been dug not by human hands but promised as part of a treaty, a blood oath, sworn between Voss's grandfather and the matriarch of the Ironblood clan, a fierce and canny woman named Vashka. The terms had been simple enough. The orcs of the high camps would guard the pass against raiders and worse things that came down from the frozen peaks, and in exchange they would have free and permanent right to draw water from the well their labor had helped dig, for themselves and every generation of Ironblood after them, sealed not with ink but with blood, a cut across the palm of each leader mingled, sworn before the mountain itself. And it held, Halden said, for 11 years. Until the elder Voss decided the water was worth more sold to travelers than shared with orcs, and when the Ironblood envoy came to collect on the oath, he had her killed instead. Struck down at the very lip of the well she had helped to dig, and her body thrown into the dark rather than sent home to her people. Emmett felt something cold settle low in his gut, and no one ever paid for it. No one human, Halden said quietly. The mountain, however, remembers what men forget. The well has never run clean since. Some seasons it merely runs low. Some seasons, he gestured helplessly at Emmett's bandaged ribs. Some seasons it takes. And the Ironblood clan. Ragesh, her grandmother, was the one betrayed. Her line has carried the oath ever since a bloodguard born to it, sworn to renew the claim generation upon generation, by blood and by combat if any dare challenge it, because that is the only tongue the old wrong still speaks in. Halden looked at him with tired, knowing eyes. She has come to renew it now, Master Prescott, and there are men within these walls who would very much rather she failed. Ragesh Ironblood did not sleep in the guest hall with the caravan drivers and the merchant clerks. She and the 6 warriors of her escort made camp instead just outside the market's east gate, hide tents pitched in a loose ring around a low fire, close enough to the walls to trade, but far enough to answer to no bell but their own. Emmett found her there 2 mornings later, still limping slightly on his bandaged knee, carrying a jug of the monastery's good barley beer as poor payment for a life he still owed her. She was sharpening her hand axe on a whetstone when he arrived, sitting on an overturned crate with her braided hair loose from its tie and falling over one shoulder, and the sight of her in the cold morning light unhurried, unguarded, the fitted leather of her travel gear catching the pale sun along the strong lines of her arms, struck him harder than the fall down the well shaft had. "You walk like a man who has been recently swallowed by a hole in the earth," she observed, without looking up. I have a great deal of practice walking that way, he said. I brought you this, it isn't much. She glanced at the jug, then at him, one dark brow arching. You are paying your life debt in beer. I'm paying it in whatever I have. If you'd rather gold, I don't have enough of that either, but I could offer you a very good well, dug to specification, anywhere you like. That earned the smile again, quicker this time, warmer, and he felt it land somewhere under his breastbone like a struck flint. She took the jug, drank without ceremony, and gestured for him to sit on the crate beside her own, which he did, close enough that he could feel the warmth coming off her like a hearthstone. Brother Haldon told you the old story, she said. It was not a question. He did. And now you look at me the way the rest of them do. Careful, sorry. Her voice had gone flat, guarded, the warmth of a moment before folded away behind old armor. No, Emmett said, and he found he meant it with more heat than he expected. I look at you like a woman who pulled a fool out of a well without stopping to ask what he was worth to her first. The rest of it is between you and men who are dead, or men who ought to be ashamed of what their kin did. It isn't between you and me. She studied him for a long moment, amber eyes moving over his face as though reading something written there in a language she had not expected to find. You are either very brave, she said slowly, or very stupid, Emmett Prescott. My mother always said both, usually in the same breath. Your mother sounds wise. She's gone now, 10 years. He said it plainly, without the weight some men carried into such admissions, and Ragash's gaze softened at the corner just slightly, the way stone softens under long falling water. My mother is also gone, she said. Killed defending a claim her own mother swore before either of us was born. I did not choose this oath, Emmett Prescott. I was born wearing it, the way I was born with this arm, this face. But I will not be the iron-blood who lets it break. Then let me help you keep it, he said, surprising himself with how quickly the offer came, how little he had to think before making it. I know that well better than any man alive, better than the ground it's cut into. If there's something wrong down in that shaft, something old, something that wants finding, I can find it faster with your strength beside my knowledge than either of us could manage alone. For a long moment she only looked at him, and he had the distinct sense of being weighed on some scale he could not see, some measure of worth she kept private and closely guarded. Then she held out her hand again, the same broad, scarred, calloused hand that had hauled him from the dark 2 nights before. Then we dig together, well digger, she said, and may the mountain finally choke on the debt it owes. He shook her hand, and neither of them let go quite as quickly as the gesture required. The work that followed was hard and slow, and to Emmett's private astonishment, some of the finest weeks of his life. Ragesh could lift stone that would have taken 4 hired men and a block-end tackle to shift, bracing collapsed shaft walls with her bare shoulders, while Emmett fitted new timber supports beneath her. And in the narrow dark of the well's throat, they learned each other's rhythms the way people learn dance steps, where to place a hand, when to call a warning, how to read the set of the other's jaw for exhaustion before either of them would admit to needing rest. She teased him without mercy about his stubborn insistence on double-checking every rope 3 times before trusting his weight to it. He teased her back about her utter inability to sit still through a meal without sharpening something. In the evenings, when the light went long and gold across the pass, she taught him a few words of the old orc tongue over the cookfire, the word for stone, for water, for stubborn fool, which she applied to him so often he began to answer to it out of habit, and he taught her in turn the small human songs the caravan drivers sang to keep pace on the long mountain road, and found he liked the sound of her low, rough voice picking up the melody far more than he liked his own. It was not all ease. The market folk did not warm to an orc war party camped at their gates, however peacefully, and word of the old blood oath had begun to travel the stalls like smoke on a bad wind. Emmett found himself, more than once, standing between Ragesh and some merchant's loud opinion about orcs and their business being better kept on the far side of the mountains, and found, too, that he did not hesitate to say so plainly, in front of witnesses, in a voice that carried. The worst of it came on a market morning bright with false cheer, when a grain seller named Perrin Dane, red-faced with drink though it was barely past dawn, planted himself in front of Ragash's tent and declared, loud enough for half the square to hear, that no market lord with sense would honor an oath sworn to a green-skinned beast, and that the sooner the Ironblood clan crawled back over the mountains where they belonged, the sooner Wingate could get back to honest human trade. Ragash's hand had gone to her axe before Perrin finished his sentence, and Emmett had no doubt at all that she could have ended the argument in a single stroke and been entirely within the old codes of her people to do it. But he stepped between them anyway, not because he doubted her ability to handle the man, but because he would not let her stand alone in it, and because some things a woman should not have to answer with her blade when a decent man's voice would do. "Perrin," Emmett said, low and even, "you've bought grain sacks off my father since before I could walk, and I've dug you 3 wells on credit you're still paying off. I'm asking you as a neighbor to walk away from this tent and not come back to it. You take her side, Prescott, over your own kind. I take the side of whoever pulled me out of a collapsing well shaft with her bare hands and asked nothing for it," Emmett said. "That's not taking a side, Perrin. That's owing a debt and paying it in respect, which costs you nothing but your pride." Perrin looked between the two of them, the well-digger with his bandaged knee and his steady, unblinking stare, and the orc woman behind him with her hand still resting, unhurried, on the haft of her axe, and something in the balance of that moment convinced him the argument was not worth pursuing. He spat in the dust and stalked off, muttering, and the small crowd that had gathered to watch drifted back to their stalls with the particular disappointment of people denied a spectacle. Ragash let out a slow breath once he was gone. "You did not need to do that." "I know," Emmett said. "I have faced worse than a drunk grain seller and needed no man to stand in front of me for it. I know that too." He turned to look at her, and found her watching him with an expression he had not seen on her before, something unguarded, something that looked almost like wonder, as though he had done a thing rarer to her than any feat of strength. "I didn't stand there because I thought you needed protecting, Ragash. I stood there because I wasn't going to let you stand alone against my own people's ugliness while I said nothing. That's a different thing." "Is it?" she said, very quietly, and it was not quite a question. "It is." She reached out then, slowly, deliberately, the way a person moves when they have decided something, and are giving themselves one last moment to change their mind before they don't, and laid her broad palm against the side of his jaw, tilting his face up slightly toward hers. Her thumb traced once along his cheekbone, rough and warm, and Emmett's breath went entirely out of him. "You are a strange little human," she murmured, close enough now that he could feel the heat of her breath. "Brave when it costs you something, gentle when it would be easier to be hard. I did not expect to find such a man digging wells at the edge of the world. I didn't expect to find a woman who could haul me out of the dark and undo me with a look either," he admitted, voice rough. "Seems we're both surprised." Her mouth curved. "I do not like surprises, Emmett Prescott." "No." "No," she said, and closed the last distance between them and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. There was nothing gentle in Ragash Ironblood when she decided to want something, and she had decided in that moment, with the whole of the market square carrying on obliviously around them, that she wanted him, the stubborn, steady, unlikely well-digger who had stood in front of her without being asked, and meant it down to the bone. Emmett's hands found her waist, the fitted leather warm from her body beneath his palms, and he kissed her back with all the pent-up want of 2 weeks spent working at her side, and pretending he did not notice every line of her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ragash pressed her forehead briefly to his, a small, startling tenderness from a woman built for war. "That," she said, "was overdue." "I would agree," Emmett said, "except that I've only known you 2 weeks. "Then we are behind schedule," she said, and there was nothing in her voice but certainty, because I do not intend to waste more of it pretending I have not already chosen you." The words landed in him like a struck bell, and he understood with a clarity that startled him that he had never in his 31 years been chosen by anyone the way this woman had just chosen him, not out of need, not out of convenience, but because she had looked at the whole of him, weighed him on whatever private scale she carried, and decided he was worth wanting. He did not have a clever answer for that. He simply pulled her back to him and kissed her again, slower this time, and let the market square go on turning around them, indifferent to the two people quietly upending each other's lives at its center. The trouble, when it came, wore the polished boots and cold smile of Warden Aldrich Voss, the younger grandson of the man who had broken the original oath, and current master of Wingate's tolls, tariffs, and by uncomfortable extension, its water rights. He summoned Emmett to the monastery's counting house on a gray afternoon a week after the kiss, and did not bother with pleasantries. "I understand," Voss said, seated behind a table stacked with ledgers, "that you have taken quite an interest in our green-skinned guests." "I've taken an interest in fixing the well I'm contracted to fix," Emmett said. "The rest is my own business." "Your own business becomes mine when it threatens the market's income." Voss steepled his fingers. "The Ironblood woman intends to renew her clan's claim on our water. Free water, Master Prescott, drawn by right rather than toll, for every orc caravan that passes through these gates until the end of days. Do you understand what that would cost this market?" "I understand what it would cost the Ironblood clan not to have it." "Water enough to cross the pass without losing half their number to thirst in the high camps. How touchingly you've come to care for their welfare." Voss's smile did not reach his eyes. "I have arranged a challenge. It is within the old codes. Any Bloodguard's claim may be tested by combat, and if she loses, the oath is void, the water reverts fully to the market's control, and I need never again hear the word Ironblood spoken within these walls. I have hired a champion, a very good one, Sir Combe Drager, late of the Border Wars, undefeated in 11 years of paid combat. You'd risk her life over a toll fee." "I would risk her life over the survival of everything my grandfather and his grandfather built here," Voss said, without a flicker of shame. "You may tell her the challenge stands 3 days hence, in the market square, before whatever witnesses care to gather. Or I will tell her myself, and you may explain to her afterward why you did not." Emmett left the counting house with his jaw set, and his hands curled into fists at his sides, and found Ragesh exactly where he expected to, sharpening her axe by the fire outside the east gate, as though the last several weeks had carved a permanent groove into her habits. She listened to the whole of it without interrupting, her expression settling into something hard and ancient, a look he imagined her grandmother might have worn at the lip of this very well 2 generations past. "Drager," she said when he finished. "I know the name. Undefeated, they say. 11 years. Ragesh." "I have been fighting since I was 14 years old, Emmett Prescott," she said, not unkindly, but with an edge that made clear the conversation's direction was not open for negotiation. "This oath was written into my blood before I could walk. I will not let a paid sword and a greedy man's coin be the reason my people go thirsty in the high passes." "I'm not asking you not to fight," Emmett said. "I'm telling you I'm afraid, and I don't care if that's a thing a man is supposed to say to a woman like you. I've watched you lift stone no ox could shift. I've watched you carry beams on your shoulders that would break my spine in half. And I am still afraid because Voss did not hire an undefeated man out of habit." Something in her face gentled just slightly at that admission. She set the axe down and took his face in both broad hands, the way she had that first day in the market square, and held his gaze steady. "Then be afraid," she said. "It does not shame you, but do not ask me to refuse this. I would not respect the man who asked it of me, and I have grown to respect you a great deal, Emmett Prescott." "I'm not asking you to refuse," he said. "I'm asking you to let me stand at your side when it happens, not to fight for you, just so you know when you step into that circle that you don't step into it alone." She kissed him then, fierce and brief, and did not answer with words, because none were needed. The morning of the challenge, the entire market turned out to watch, spilling from stalls and monastery cloisters into a rough ring marked with rope and stakes at the square's center. Monks lined the cloister walls in their gray robes, faces unreadable. Merchants who had never spoken a kind word to an orc in their lives leaned forward with the particular hunger of a crowd that wants blood, whichever color it comes in. Voss himself stood on the counting-house steps in fine wool, arms crossed, already tasting his coming victory. Sir Combe Drager was a mountain of a man, broad as a door, his plate armor scarred from 11 years of paid killing, a longsword strapped across his back that looked heavy enough to fell a tree in one stroke. He rolled his shoulders as he entered the ring, grinning at the crowd like a man greeting old friends. Ragesh entered from the opposite side, and Emmett, standing at the rope's edge with his heart hammering hard enough to hurt, thought he had never seen anyone look so magnificently unafraid. She had stripped to fighting leathers, lighter than her travel gear, leaving her strong arms bare, her braided hair bound tight against her skull, her hand axe and a long orcish knife the only weapons she carried against Drager's sword and shield. "Ironblood," Voss called, formal and cold. "Do you accept this challenge to your claim?" "I accept it," Ragesh said, her voice carrying clean across the whole square. "And when it is done, I expect this market to remember what it cost your family the last time it thought an oath could be broken with a sword instead of honored with water." The fight began without further ceremony. Drager came in hard and fast for a man his size, sword arcing in a blow meant to end the contest in its first exchange. And Ragesh did not meet it head-on. She was gone from where the sword expected her, low and sideways, her axe striking a glancing blow off his shield that rang across the square like a struck bell. The crowd, despite itself, gasped. Drager recovered fast, pressed forward, and for a long, brutal stretch it was give and take, steel on steel, the two of them circling in the packed dirt while dust rose gold in the morning light and the crowd's noise swelled and receded with every near miss. He was strong. He was, Emmett realized with cold dread, very nearly her equal in raw power. But Ragesh fought with a decade more of desperate, earned experience than a paid mercenary ever needed to learn, and where Drager fought to win a purse, she fought for a mother she had lost to this exact debt, for a grandmother whose blood had been spilled unpaid at the lip of that very well not 200 yards from where they now stood. When his shield came up a fraction too high, she was already low, already moving, and her knife opened a line across the back of his knee that dropped him hard onto the packed earth. The crowd roared a raw, animal sound, half of them screaming for Drager to rise, half of them, to Emmett's faint surprise, screaming Ragesh's name, the name of the woman half of them had sneered at not a month before. Drager rose, roaring with fury and pain, and swung wide and hard, a killing blow meant to end the fight in blood, and Ragesh caught it on the flat of her axe, steel screaming against steel, close enough now that Emmett could see the strain in the tendons of her neck, the sweat cutting clean lines through the dust on her face. She turned the blow aside, stepped inside his guard, and drove her shoulder into his chest with the full weight of her body behind it. Sir Combe Drager, undefeated 11 years, hit the dirt of the market square on his back with a sound like a felled oak, and did not get up. The square went silent for one long, suspended breath, and then it broke into noise, cheering, disbelieving, half the crowd surging forward against the ropes to see the champion truly beaten, monks murmuring prayers, merchants who had wagered against her cursing their luck, and Emmett Prescott vaulting the rope without a second thought to reach her before anyone else could. She was standing, breathing hard, victorious and bleeding. Drager's blade had caught her along the ribs in the last exchange, a shallow but ugly gash that had soaked the side of her leathers dark, and as the adrenaline of the fight began to ebb, Emmett saw her sway just slightly before catching herself. "Ragesh, I am well," she said, though her voice was tighter than he'd heard it. "It is a scratch." It is bleeding through your leathers." She looked down at the wound as though it belonged to someone else, then back up at him, and something in her amber eyes triumph, pain, and something else entirely, something raw and unguarded undid him completely. "Then let it bleed," she said. "I have earned it." The monastery's healer, a soft-spoken brother named Eamon, worked with brisk efficiency once Ragesh was brought to the infirmary cleaning the wound, which proved deeper than a scratch, a long, ugly gash across 3 ribs that would scar badly if it healed on its own, and offering, as any competent healer would, the monastery's store of scar salve, a thick, pale ointment prized across the valley for smoothing wounds closed clean and near invisible. Ragesh looked at the little clay pot in Brother Eamon's hand as though it had insulted her. "No," she said. "Forgive me," Eamon said, startled. "It will draw the wound closed faster and prevent much of the scarring. I said no." She swung her legs off the cot, wincing but resolute, and waved off the monk's protests with a hand still faintly trembling from the fight. "Bind it clean if you must, but I will not have that wound erased." Emmett, standing in the doorway where he had been pacing for the better part of an hour, stepped forward. "Ragesh, it's a healer's kindness, not an insult. Let him ease it." She turned to him, and the look in her eyes was not anger. It was something older, deeper, something he had not yet learned the shape of in her. "You do not understand," she said. "Among my people, a bloodguard's wounds are not shamed away with salves and soft cloth. Every scar I carry is a debt paid, a fight survived, a piece of my grandmother's oath honored in my own flesh. My mother had 11 such scars when she died. I have 4 now, counting this one, and I will not have a monk's ointment lie about what it cost me to win back my people's water. I know what you meant," she said more gently now, and reached out to take his hand, drawing him closer to the cot despite Brother Eamon's uncertain hovering. "You meant kindness. But this is not a wound to be hidden, Emmett Prescott. This is the mark of the truce I have just bought back for my people with my own blood, on the very ground where my grandmother's blood was spilled and never honored. I will wear it. I will let it scar, and I will not be ashamed of it in front of anyone." Brother Eamon, sensing correctly that he was no longer part of the conversation, murmured something about fetching clean bandages and withdrew. Ragesh sat on the edge of the cot, still bare along one side where the wound ran. Blood cleaned away now, but the raw, angry line of the cut plainly visible. 3 ribs worth of torn flesh that would knit, in time, into a scar she would carry for the rest of her life. She looked at Emmett for a long moment, something vulnerable moving behind the fierce set of her face, and then deliberately she reached for his hand and drew it toward her side. "Look at it," she said. "Truly look. Do not flinch from it and do not pity it. Ragesh, I don't have to. I am not offering this to everyone, well digger." Her voice had gone low, rough, stripped of all its battlefield iron and left with something far more fragile underneath. Most men, human or orc, look away from a woman's scars, or worse, they look at them like a curiosity, a story to tell over ale. I have let no man look at this one since the healer cleaned it. I am choosing to let you. Emmett understood then, with a clarity that stole the breath from his chest, exactly what she was offering him. Not simply the sight of a wound, the whole of herself, the fear she would not show the crowd, the grief for a grandmother killed at this same well, the pride bound up inextricably with the pain, all of it laid bare in a way she had allowed no one else to see. He knelt beside the cot and very carefully, very gently, let his fingers trace the edge of the wound, not the salve-smoothed nothing it might have become, but the raw, real truth of what she had paid to stand in that circle and win. "You earned this," he said quietly, "the same way you earned every other scar you carry. I see it, Ragesh, I see all of it, and I don't flinch from a single inch of you." Her breath caught, and for one unguarded moment the fiercest woman he had ever known looked almost undone by the simple fact of being truly seen. "You have earned the right to see it," she said, low and rough. "No other man has. You will not be the last thing I let close to me, Emmett Prescott, if that is what you are wondering. I have decided that already." "I wasn't wondering," he said, though his voice was not quite steady. "I was hoping." She laughed then, a real laugh, startled out of her by the honesty of it, and drew him up and into a kiss that tasted of relief and victory, and something far more permanent settling into place between them, careful of her ribs but hungry all the same, and for a long while neither of them said anything more at all. In the days that followed, while Ragesh's wound began the slow work of scarring proud and pink and utterly her own, the two of them found themselves rarely apart. She moved her sleeping roll from her clan's tents into the small stone chamber the monastery had given Emmett for his contracted stay, an arrangement that raised eyebrows among the more traditional monks and drew exactly no complaint from either of them. Their nights together were unhurried at first, tender in a way that surprised them both. Her strength gentled to careful stillness as she learned the shape of him in the dark, his hands learning by patient inches the places her scars marked and the places still smooth, until the night neither of them wished to stop learning, and did not. What passed between them then was not spoken of after, except in the way she pressed her forehead to his in the gray hour before dawn and murmured, low and satisfied, that she had never in all her years imagined being claimed so thoroughly by such gentle hands, and he answered that he had never imagined being wanted so fiercely by anyone at all. And in the warm, unhurried quiet that followed, something between them settled into place that neither battle nor curse nor old debt would ever again fully unsettle. But the curse of Wingate's Well had not been broken by a single duel, however dramatic, and both of them knew it. The water still ran uneasy in its depths, clearer than before, but never fully clean, and twice more in the weeks that followed. Sections of the shaft's old stonework crumbled without cause, nearly taking two of the monastery's novices with it. Ragesh grew increasingly grim over these incidents, and one evening, sitting by the cook-fire with the wound along her ribs finally closing into its permanent shape, she finally said aloud what had clearly been sitting heavy on her for days. "The duel settled the challenge to my claim," she said. "It did not settle the debt itself. My grandmother's oath was broken with murder, Emmett. Blood spilled and never honored, a body thrown into that well and never recovered, never sent home to rest beneath open sky the way our dead are meant to be. Until that wrong is answered, the mountain will keep taking its due from whoever comes close enough to pay it." "You think her body is still down there," Emmett said slowly, "after 2 generations. I think the mountain does not forget, and I think Old Stone holds its dead better than we like to believe." She looked at him, something fierce and pleading both in her expression at once. "I need to go down into that well, Emmett, all the way to the bottom, past where any rope has reached in living memory. I need to bring my grandmother's envoy home, if her bones are there to find, and give her the rights her death was denied. And I cannot do it without a well-digger who knows that shafts every crumbling stone better than any man alive." He did not hesitate, though every practical instinct he owned told him the descent would be more dangerous than anything either of them had yet faced. "Then we go together," he said, "same as we started." Brother Haldon, when told of the plan, went pale and argued for a full day against it, citing the shaft's unstable lower reaches, the 2 recent collapses, the very real possibility that whatever ancient malice haunted the well's depths might simply kill them both rather than allow itself to be found and answered. Ragesh listened to the whole of his warning with patient respect, and then told him, gently but with absolute finality, that she had not crossed 2 mountain ranges and buried a mother to the same unfinished debt, only to leave her grandmother's bones unhonored in the dark a moment longer than necessary. Voss, stripped of his champion and increasingly aware that the market's own counsel had begun to whisper about his handling of the affair, did not interfere. He had, in the wake of Drager's defeat, grown notably quieter, and Emmett suspected correctly, as it later proved, that the warden had already begun quietly making arrangements to be elsewhere should the truth of his grandfather's murder come fully to light. They descended 2 days later at first light, with the whole market gathered uneasily at the well's mouth to watch. Emmett went first, testing every hold with the same triple-checked caution that had once earned Ragash's teasing, driving iron pegs into the stone at careful intervals for both of their ropes. Ragash followed close behind, a coil of fresh rope over one shoulder, a shuttered lantern in hand, her expression set into the same fierce calm she had worn stepping into the fighting circle against Drager. The shaft narrowed as they went, the old stonework giving way, 40 feet down, to raw mountain rock, cold and wet and ancient, water seeping from cracks that had no business existing so far from any spring. Emmett's lantern light caught strange marks scratched into the stone here and there, old orcish glyphs, worn nearly smooth by time, that Ragash paused to read with a hushed, careful reverence. "A warding," she murmured. "My grandmother's own hand, I think. She marked this place before she died." They reached the bottom of the shaft an hour later, boots sinking into cold silt at the edge of the black water that fed the whole of Wingate, and it was there, half buried in the silt at the water's edge, that Emmett's probing pole struck something that was not stone. They uncovered the bones together, careful and slow, Ragash's hands trembling, the first time Emmett had ever seen those broad, strong hands unsteady, as the shape of a skeleton emerged from the silt, curled as though the woman had fallen and never been allowed to rest since. A tarnished bronze cuff still circled one wrist bone, etched with the same glyphs marking the walls above. "It is her," Ragash whispered. "The envoy. My grandmother's own envoy, murdered at the lip of this well and thrown down to rot unmourned." Her voice cracked on the last word, grief 2 generations deep finally finding its way to the surface. "She has been alone down here for 60 years, Emmett. 60 years, waiting for someone to come and carry her home." "Then let's carry her home," Emmett said quietly, and together, with more care than either of them had shown any task before, they gathered the bones into a length of clean cloth Ragash had brought for exactly this purpose, binding them gently, reverently, for the climb back to open sky. It was on the climb up, exhausted and grief-heavy, and moving too quickly in their eagerness to bring the dead woman back into daylight, that the shaft finally gave way in earnest. A groan of settling stone above them, a shower of loose rock, and then a section of the old wall collapsing outward directly above Emmett's head as he climbed. He never saw it coming. He felt only the sudden, crushing weight of Ragash's body slamming into him from the side, driving them both hard against the shaft's far wall as a ton of loose stone crashed down through the space he had occupied a heartbeat before. She took the worst of the falling debris across her back and shoulder, grunting hard with the impact, shielding him bodily with the whole of her considerable strength, until the collapse finally settled, and the dust began slowly to clear. "Ragash," Emmett's voice cracked with terror as he pulled back to see her, certain she had been crushed. She was bleeding from a gash along her shoulder, bruised badly along one side, but alive, breathing hard, already pushing herself upright with the stubborn refusal to yield that he had come, in these short weeks, to recognize as simply who she was. "I am well," she said, echoing her words from the day of the duel, and this time he did not argue, only pulled her into a fierce, desperate embrace amid the settling dust, her grandmother's envoy still bound safe in cloth between them, both of them shaking with the aftershock of how close the mountain had come to taking everything. "You could have died," he said into her hair, "shielding me." "You would have shielded me the same," she said, "had our places been reversed. Do not scold me for loving you the way I know how, Emmett Prescott." It was the first time either of them had said the word aloud, and it landed between them in the cramped, dust-choked dark of the shaft with more weight than any declaration made in daylight could have carried. "I love you," he said back, immediately, fiercely, as though he had been holding the words ready for weeks and only now found the courage to spend them. "I have loved you since you hauled me out of this exact well, and called me a fool for not checking my rope." She laughed, a wet, startled, disbelieving laugh, half grief and half joy, and kissed him hard amid the rubble, careful of neither of their injuries. And the two of them climbed the rest of the way to the surface with her grandmother's bones held safe between them and something unbreakable finally, fully forged between their two hearts. The rites for the murdered envoy were held at dawn 3 days later, on the high ground above Windgate where the wind ran clean, and the whole of the pass could be seen unrolling toward the mountains beyond. Ragesh's clan warriors stood in solemn rows, and to the surprise of many, Brother Haldan and a good portion of the monastery's brothers stood with them, heads bowed, while the bones were laid to rest beneath open sky at last, wrapped in clean cloth and orcish grave cloths sewn through the night by Ragesh's own hands. Emmett stood beside her throughout, not as a bystander but as a mourner in his own right, and when the final words were spoken, an old orcish blessing for the dead, which Ragesh spoke in a clear, unwavering voice despite the tears finally allowed to fall openly down her face. He took her hand and held it, and she did not let go. That same morning, as the sun cleared the eastern ridgeline, the well's water ran clear for the first time in 2 generations, sweet, cold, entirely untainted, drawn up in bucket after bucket by monks and merchants and orc warriors alike, all of them tasting, in wondering silence, the end of a curse none of them had truly believed could be lifted. Warden Aldrich Voss did not wait to face the market council's inquiry into his grandfather's crime. Once the truth of the murdered envoy became common knowledge across every stall and cloister in Windgate. He departed before dawn the following day with what coin he could gather, and the council, shamed, finally, into honesty, publicly renewed the old blood oath in full, this time carved into stone at the well's mouth where no future warden could pretend to have forgotten it. Free passage and free water, for the Ironblood clan and all who traveled under their banner, for so long as Windgate stood. Ragesh's warriors began preparations to return to the high camps within the week, their errand fulfilled, their people's water rights secured beyond any further challenge. Emmett watched them break camp with a hollow feeling growing steadily in his chest, unwilling to ask the question that had been sitting unspoken between himself and Ragesh, since the moment the bones were laid to rest. Whether what they had built together in these few extraordinary weeks could possibly survive the distance between a well-digger tied to a mountain pass and a bloodguard whose whole life belonged to a clan camped 2 ranges away. He found her on the last evening before her people's departure, standing alone at the lip of the well, looking down into water that ran clear and quiet now where once it had run cursed. "You're leaving in the morning," he said, and could not keep the ache out of his voice. "My people are leaving in the morning," she corrected, not turning. "I have not yet decided if I am among them." "Ragesh, I am the last Ironblood bloodguard," she said, turning now to face him fully, her expression unusually uncertain for a woman who had faced down an undefeated champion without a flicker of doubt. "My oath is fulfilled. My grandmother rests beneath open sky. My clan's water is secured for every generation to come, carved in stone where no man can pretend otherwise. I have spent my whole life bound to a debt that is, as of 3 days ago, finally, fully paid." She stepped closer, close enough to take both his hands in hers. "For the first time in my life, Emmett Prescott, I am free to choose where I stand, and I find I do not wish to stand anywhere that you are not." Emmett's heart was pounding so hard he thought she must surely hear it. "You'd stay, here at Windgate. Give up your clan, your camps, everything you've known. I would not give it up," she said. "I would visit it often, and drag you along to meet every warrior who ever doubted a human could hold his own on a mountain trail. But my clan does not need a bloodguard chained to an old grave any longer. It needs warriors who choose their own path, the way I am choosing now." Her thumb traced along his knuckles, and her voice dropped, rough with feeling she no longer bothered to guard. "I have been chosen by no one in my whole life, Emmett, not truly. I was born into an oath, born into a war, born into a role I never asked for and could not refuse. You are the first thing, the only thing I have ever simply wanted freely for no reason but that I could not imagine my life continuing well without you in it. I want you, Emmett said, the same way, freely. For no better reason than that I have never in my life felt as necessary, as wanted, as I do standing next to you. He drew her hands up to his chest, over the wild hammer of his own heart. Stay, Ragesh. Not because Wingate needs its water or because some old debt demands it. Stay because I am asking you to, as plainly and selfishly as any man ever asked a woman anything. Stay because I love you, and because this valley, this pass, this well, none of it means anything to me half as much as you standing beside it. She kissed him then, slow and certain, the last of her old fierce guardedness finally, fully unclenched, and when she pulled back her amber eyes were bright with unshed tears and unmistakable joy. Then I choose you, Emmett Prescott, she said, as plainly and selfishly as you have chosen me, not out of debt, not out of duty. Simply because I looked at the whole of you, weighed you against every warrior and every camp and every mountain I have ever called home, and found that none of it outweighed the plain, stubborn wonder of you. The following morning, her clan departed for the high camps without her, warriors clasping her arm in the old fashion and promising to return with the spring caravans, and Ragesh Ironblood stayed behind at the head of Wingate Pass, in the small stone chamber that had become, in the space of a single extraordinary season, not merely Emmett Prescott's home but theirs. She kept the scar along her ribs unsalved, unsmoothed, exactly as she had sworn, a visible mark of the debt she had paid and the truce she had won, worn openly and without shame, and every night that Emmett Prescott traced his fingers along its raw, honest line, he was reminded that he had been given the rare and singular privilege of being the one man alive who had truly, fully earned the right to see it.